The realization of a hegemonic apparatus, insofar as it creates new ideological terrain, determines a reform of consciousness and of methods of knowledge. When one succeeds in introducing a new morality in conformity with the new conception of the world, one finishes by introducing the conception as well. In other words, one determines a reform of the whole of philosophy. Friends, have you often wondered why people believe very contradictory things? They'll hold on to basically these truths, and they don't actually seem to understand why they believe what they do. And they don't possess the ability to actually defend what it is that they believe. Yet they continue as though that's what they believe. They let it fundamentally control every part of their life. So, this section of the prison notebooks, it's often titled The Philosophy of Praxis, is one of Gramsci's most kind of abstract sections of the book, but it's also one of his most interesting. Effectively, for Gramsci, and for those who don't know who Gramsci was the leader of the Italian Communist Party and was put into prison after the rise of Mussolini. While he was in prison, he managed to get a bunch of his notes sort of smuggled out of the prison, and they were eventually translated in English, but they weren't widely spread in the English sort of world until around the 70s, when they finally published in an actual coherent form. And they became incredibly important to the modern understanding of knowledge. So, if I was to put a TLDR on Gramsci, effectively, for him, common sense is the most powerful kind of knowledge that there can be. If your kind of knowledge, it's so pervasive and so automatic and so quote-unquote natural that people don't even question it, then it's a very powerful kind of knowledge. And when I say powerful kind of knowledge, I'm referring to that in the Foucauldian sense, this idea that knowledge is power. Think about it. If you're able to convince somebody that the sky contains a bunch of evil demons who will prevent you from leaving the planet or something that's insane, but just bear with me. If you try to tell someone this, they would think you're insane. If you told them the sky was blue, they would probably agree with you. They very rarely know why the sky is blue. And let me be very clear, I'm not doubting the color of the sky. I'm simply stating that certain pieces of knowledge are widespread. For instance, Saddam Hussein is a bad person. That's, the more pervasive that becomes, the easier it is to get society to do something, like go to war in Iraq, which is a bit of an old example. The idea that, Western thought is evil, sort of the reverse. When you're looking at Boko Haram, their name literally means Western thought is evil. And they're basically a sort of movement against or in reaction to Western thinking. If you can convince people that your party, your faction's beliefs are correct, if you can convince people that, yes, it's important to cut down social spending in order to meet within our budget. Yes, welfare is good. Yes, people who get welfare are evil. Whatever you are looking for within society at large, being able to change the dominant understanding of that society and being able to change people's understandings of their own society fundamentally allows you to control that society. And so Gramsci gave that particular kind of control a name, and his name for that was hegemony. And it's a set of ideas that are so ingrained within a society that they are taken as given. And this is really interesting because what's fascinating about that is some people like to understand thoughts. There's a certain understanding of a society that societies work like markets, that you only accept ideas when you think that that they make sense to you, you internalize them, all that good stuff. Fundamentally, that's just not true. There's a lot of things in society, like men don't wear dresses. This is a particular example. Feminism and masculinity are very interesting because they're very extreme forms of these, of hegemony. The ideas about maleness and femaleness, and yes, I'm aware, of course, there are many different people between them, but just bear with me for a second. The fact that I'm able to say something about the fact that this man in the 1950s, he'll wear a tie, he'll wear a collared shirt, his hair will be combed a certain way, won't be too long. In the 1950s, you would often see women wearing very traditional type of clothing and all that good stuff, and I say good ironically. The point of that whole digression is simply that the ideas of how you should dress, of how you should act within society, and how you should basically live your life, the vast majority of them were determined by people who are not, by a society that occurred several decades ago, people who were in that society several decades ago. You did not participate in the grand debate about whether or not men should wear pants. You just sort of accept it. There are just some fundamental truths which are socially created that humans don't think critically about. They can, but they often don't. And so, for Gramsci, in this section on the philosophy of praxis, his analysis states that when you start thinking about those sort of consensual, these ideas that are just so innate that no one questions them. Let me cite an example. Let's say that, like, fork and knife. You have to have a fork and knife every time you eat. You eat with those particular things. You hold the fork in your left hand and the knife in the right hand when you cut something. That example, again, a lot of people will do it, but it's not like they are the one who came up with it. It's not that they would even know the person who came up with it. People don't know why that's a thing. And if you tell them that, hey, you don't have to do it like that, the act of telling them that they could even make a choice about something as fundamental, as ingrained within our culture as that, basically, in effect, becomes a kind of power that pushes against those normative and very hegemonic ideals. So if you were in 1970 and you were to walk over to a woman and say, you can wear pants, and this would not be particularly like radical for nowadays, but back then you were not allowed to wear pants to school in Canada if you were a woman, and for someone to come up to you and say, that's kind of a thing that it's bullshit, and there's no reason that you can't wear pants. They fit you just the same as anything else. This then basically permits people to actually question those ingrained beliefs, to actually re-examine why they believe what it is they believe, and it allows them to sort of see beyond those simple, ingrained, unquestioned things. One of the most important things that Gramsci speaks about is that within class analysis, or within, for instance, majority-minority situations, you often see a situation where a lot of the times the hegemonic ideals are that of the powerful minority. And of course, because Gramsci was a Marxist, he would say this would be the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie basically says that it is good to save your money. It's good to invest in the long term, even though these are things that most workers can't really do. But, they're made to feel bad because they're not able to do it. You're supposed to own a car, own a home, etc., etc. These sort of unquestioned rules of the given society, which effectively have a lot of power over the vast majority of people. You have to remember, this is a particular, this is against the sort of classic liberal understanding of knowledge, which is sort of the social contract, the sort of Lockean conception that everyone constantly comes to a big debate table and decides to organize society in a fair way, which makes no sense when you understand history and the fact that humans, we don't. Were you sent were you sent a form asking you to determine the various cultural factors that or help to sort of elect someone to change the Constitution? Probably not. The Constitution was from the United States, hasn't changed since the 1700s, and the Constitution in Canada, no one likes to talk about it. So it's very funny. There also isn't a Constitution in the United Kingdom because fuck them, I guess. I don't know. Regardless, the most important point of this section of the book is that the mass of people experience philosophy, that is, knowledge, understanding, and interpretation, as faith. And they don't mean that in the sense that, like, they're literally someone who, they take everything society says as, like, gospel truth. They don't question anything at all. What it means is that people have no concrete memory of why they believe what they do. People, you don't remember why exactly you believe that it's safer to drive in a car than it is to drive in an airplane. You don't exactly remember why it is that you vote for whomever you vote for. You wear a particular color more often than another color, or you listen to a certain kind of music than another person. In effect, the mass of people, and this is the fascinating question, because if you're looking at sort of, I think one of the most interesting discussions that the left needs to have is, why is it that the left lost control of the mass of people in the United States? Why is it that the right wing is able to sort of control the discourse and sort of the language that people use in those spaces? Why is it that workers, like coal miners, people who do certain, I'm not talking about the petty bourgeoisie, like folks who sit around and sell sea-doos to each other, but I'm talking about people in working areas. Think about Wisconsin, think about Michigan. Why is it that they support the sort of visual aesthetics of authoritarianism and fascism? And I think Gramsci would basically say that, well, it's because the left hasn't done a good enough job getting out into these communities and telling these people what they ought to believe, basically. He says that the most important way to actually convince society to do something is to just find a good slogan and repeat it constantly. Best example of this is Medicare for All. What does Medicare for All mean? Well, literally refers to Bernie Sanders' very good slogan, which basically said that they should just expand Medicare. Like, it does literally mean something, but the point of the slogan is to say that no, we do not need private companies dealing with healthcare. That's what it says in the subtext, but what it does is if you repeat it, you suddenly get the Republicans not being able to really change the American healthcare system like they tried to do, because the vast majority of people realize that there are some fundamentally things problematic with it, and they don't know what else. They don't have other options. It's just that people know that there is some kind of moral injustice. Now, Bernie Sanders' campaign obviously, didn't work at some level, which is interesting fundamentally, because what it actually says is that there is a large swath of the American people that don't believe that electoral politics are useful or can actually lead to some kind of meaningful change. And what's unfortunate is that they are right. The United States is in a particular mess, which I'll discuss later. But regardless, the thing that you have to do is you have to meet people halfway. You have to convince them through repetition, through very clever sloganeering, similar to advertisement. You have to use all these tactics to convince these people that your needs and desires are the same as theirs. And what's interesting is that there is a very clear failure from the Democratic Party, which is not a party of the left. I know that. But the Democratic Party fails fundamentally to argue and work and sort of build a sort of mass coalition that says that their needs, their desires are the exact same as these sort of downtrodden people. And that's ultimately what Trump does better. Trump effectively stands there and says, look, we're going to fix it. Doesn't explain why. Doesn't need to explain why. Does it make sense? No. But it doesn't need to, because people don't. The vast majority of people do not require an analytical, philosophic flowchart explaining to them why they believe what they believe. If you walk up to them and say, you know what, I'm going to fix whatever problems you have, we're going to get in there, we're going to make it happen again, we're going to kick out these deep state bureaucrats, and we're going to replace them with people who are going to make America great again. Fundamentally, that doesn't actually give a coherent prescription or any kind of solution, but it doesn't need to, because all it's doing is it's working off of people's sort of innate and internal sort of unquestioned beliefs about the United States. People in these areas believe the United States is fundamentally good, number one. They believe that for some reason, and it can depend on the person, they believe maybe it's bureaucrats, maybe it's the Democrats, maybe it's high taxes or government regulation or whatever. All of these various things are preventing America from being great. And then they have a leader come in and say, well, we're going to fix it. We're going to make America great again. And if you have someone who basically comes there and says that to you, and you believe, first of all, that America, could be great, but is sort of crumbling due to some kind of liberal, grand failure to sort of make things operate, which sadly is not. It's not actually a bad way to understand American history of the last 30 years. That's not necessarily to say that the reactionaries are correct. It's just fundamentally interesting because the technocrats that the Democrats keep pushing have continued to fail and fail and continue to fail to basically create more jobs in these sort of basically abandoned areas such as the Rust Belt and the previous industrial areas of the United States. And ultimately, this leads to fundamentally the right wing was able to get enough people in enough places to agree that they were going to help them. But I think the most important thing to take away from Gramsci's The Philosophy of Praxis is fundamentally that people don't actually understand why it is that they believe what they believe. And he actually gives an example. If you were to stand in front of someone, let's just imagine it's a Make America Great Again person, like a mega chud or whatever the hell you want to call them. You're standing in front of them, and you say, "Okay, I'm gonna debate you. Okay, why is it that you believe X?" And then you explain to that person you just absolutely find a way. You're just a genius of debate. You just rip this person from head to toe of all of their logical fallacies or whatever. You tell them exactly why everything that they say is stupid. And they don't know what to say in response. Well, Gramsci says that if you were able to do this, and it's very unlikely that you would be able to, because it's 9 times out of 10 they would just be like, nah, that's all bullshit. But just assuming that they actually listened to you, which is a big ask, but if they did listen to you, and you sit there and you explain this to them very patiently, what happens? Well, they'll probably say the following: "Huh? Well, I never thought of it that way. Well, I don't know what. I guess those problems you point out that make sense, but look, I don't quite understand why it is that Trump did X or Y. But I'm sure that there is, and he'll think this to himself, I'm sure there is someone who will be able to defeat this point." And so you have the situation where even if you were able to completely use all the facets of reason and logic and all that good stuff, and you were able to get this person to admit, or maybe not physically say anything, but just admit to themselves, I don't actually know what's going on, they will basically believe that someone else will have a point to match. They just gotta go listen to Ben Shapiro or some other right-wing demagogue. And that person will have the will have an answer for that argument. And that ultimately is why Gramsci says that people view their ideas like faith. They either don't question it, and even if they do question it, they believe in it. And by believing in it, they don't actually, like, a human is not an intellectual sieve. You're not gonna wander around and every time you read something that is very well argued, you just completely change who you are. You don't do that. If you encounter something that seems like it makes sense to you, you find someone who is able to sort of argue against it, someone who's better or knows more about it. Because people don't think that they necessarily have to understand why it is that they believe anything. But they believe that someone else does. They believe that there is an answer. And as long as they have faith in the idea that there is an answer somewhere, then they'll continue to believe what they believe. That ultimately is the point of the piece. So, if there are any takeaways from that, it's effective that you kind of have to realize that it's not about debating someone earnestly. It's about using media and using the various methods of mass communication to get the point across to enough of these people that eventually enough people around them start to change their mind and they start to get nervous because maybe they're the one who's wrong, and eventually they will sort of come to internalize a new truth. This is what Gramsci refers to as the counter-hegemonic, which is basically the truth that you want to impose upon a given group. It takes a lot of time, and I think activists need to be patient, and they need to give people the time to sort of think and internalize these ideas. And they need to make these ideas digestible. They need to make them small, easy to digest, easy to understand, and they need to make them make sense with some people who genuinely might believe reactionary things. That's not to say you have to be a reactionary. It's just that if you want to get anywhere, you have to convince these people. You just have to convince them some way. So yeah, that ultimately is my discussion of Gramsci's The Philosophy of Praxis. It's not praxis in the same way as the Austrian economic school, so if you're a libertarian, no, this is not that. Unless you're a French libertarian, in which case, yes, it is that. If anyone's confused by that joke, look it up on Wikipedia. Anyway, I mostly do these for practice, because I'm not very good at speaking into a mic. So if anyone has any comments or suggestions, please point them in. Anything that's helpful, I will definitely take it. And with that, I hope you guys have a great day. Bye for now.